By the end of this video, you'll have an understanding of how the statewide judicial emergency extension applies to your criminal case, as well as what you need to be doing based upon that. I'm Paul Ghanouni, founder and managing attorney at the teen and young adult defense firm, where we focus on protecting the futures of people in their teens through their mid-20s when they get in trouble with the law. This video is designed to be a general, informational video. It's not going to be specific legal advice to your case. If you need specific legal advice to your case, please contact our office for a complimentary defense strategy meeting. On June 12th, the Georgia Supreme Court extended the statewide judicial emergency. Now, there are some key things that you need to be aware of from this as they apply to a criminal case. One is that extension can be ended with a week's notice. Another is that courts are expected to restart hearing cases as much as they can while complying with public health guidelines. Now, they're not allowed to summon jurors for new jury trials, and they're not allowed to summon new grand jurors, which can apply to cases that are pending indictment, and they need a grand jury to indict the case. But they've put together a judicial task force that is focused on coming up with plans, templates, procedures to be able to reopen up the courts and conduct jury-related proceedings. They're hoping that they're going to have that information out sometime in July to give courts direction. They did note that they don't expect jury trials to begin anytime before August at the earliest. Next, it's important to be aware that all deadlines that were due during the judicial emergency that were stopped because of the judicial emergency restart on July 14th, except for deadlines related to jury trials such as statutory speedy trial demands or deadlines that relate to grand jury proceedings. An example of this is if you had motions that were due in your criminal case, for example, on March 23rd, they're now going to be due on July 23rd. So any deadlines that started, which the biggest one for most people are to file motions from arraignment, which is required to be within 10 days, those deadlines are going to resume on July 14th with however many days you had left when the judicial emergency started. So you need to make sure you're aware of that and you're taking any steps that you need to meet any deadlines in your criminal case. Another thing to be aware of for criminal cases is that the statute of limitations for all cases has been extended by the time of the judicial emergency. So from March 14th to July 14th, that period of time is extended in all statutes of limitations. So if there was a case that the statute of limitations would have run at the beginning of or the middle of March, it would now have extra time added on to it to push it into the middle of July. If you had a case that the statute of limitations is going to run 2 years from now, the situation is that if the case started before the judicial emergency, that statute of limitations is extended, and that's something to be aware of with criminal cases as well. Now, despite the statewide deadline for July 14th to restart any deadlines for motions or other things in a criminal case, the judge for specific criminal cases can impose earlier deadlines. So if you have a specific case, the judge could change those deadlines in your case and even make them earlier than that July 14th if the judge thinks it's appropriate in your case. You need to be aware of that, make sure you're in tune with what's going on in your criminal case. Courts are being encouraged to use technology wherever they can to conduct court proceedings, as long as using that technology complies with court rules, complies with the applicable laws, as well as the Constitution of Georgia and the Constitution of the United States. Judges are also allowed to require in-person hearings for their cases as long as they're complying with the public health guidelines that have been issued. Additionally, each court is going to be required to implement guidance for their reopening plan, what their process is going to be, how they're going to comply with public health guidelines, and how they're going to basically make sure that everybody who has to go to court is safe in going to court. Those guidelines are going to be required to be submitted to the administrative offices of the courts, where they're going to have a listing of all the courts and their guidelines that are going to be available on their website so that people can look at that, and we'll have a link to that below the video in case you want to look at a particular court and see what their guidelines are going to be. The chief judge in a particular court can also put more restrictive guidelines in place if that particular court needs those more restrictive guidelines because of any health issues that are going on in that court. For example, recently Floyd County actually shut down their court for 2 weeks because somebody who worked in the courthouse tested positive for COVID-19. They can't do anything that's less restrictive than the court's order, but they can do things that are more restrictive if they need to handle local issues. Now, the big things that you need to be doing if you have a pending criminal case in a Georgia court right now is you need to make sure that your address is up to date with the clerk of court. Now, with COVID-19, it's caused a lot of disruption with a lot of people, with a lot of families. Many of them have had to move, change their addresses, and you need to make sure your address is up to date with the court, because that's where they're going to send court notices to if you have a hearing scheduled, if something happens. And if they don't have the right address for you and they send that court notice and then you don't show up for court, a bench warrant is going to be issued for your arrest. And that's not where anybody wants to be right now, is in a jail. The next thing you should look at doing is trying to proactively find out your court date. If you're calling the clerk of court where your case is to update your address, you can also ask them if you have any court dates currently coming up. And you can check back with them as often as you'd like to see if there's a court date in your case. That way you make sure you don't miss any court dates, you don't run the risk of not showing up for a court date that you're required to be there for. The next thing that we've already talked about is that all of the previous deadlines resume. And so that's really important, is if there were deadlines in your case, like most commonly from arraignment, that motions be filed in 10 days, that you are aware that those deadlines are going to resume, and that the steps that need to be taken, like having an attorney file motions in your cases or filing them yourself if you're going to do them, are done within 10 days of your arraignment, or any other deadlines that may exist in your criminal case. You also want to start preparing for court. Some people we've talked to during this time have kind of had this mindset or thought like, nothing's happening right now, I can just wait till I get my next court date to start preparing or doing what I need to do. But it's really important to go ahead and start preparing for court, to be prepared for what's coming up in your case, to make sure that if you need witnesses interviewed, if defenses need to be prepared, if evidence needs to be reviewed, that all of those things can be done to help protect you in your case and to try to get you the best outcome. And the last thing is to expect things to be different. A lot of us don't know exactly how the courts are going to run and how they're going to do things to be able to comply with the public health guidelines, what things are going to be done virtually, what things are going to be done in person. Every case is running a little differently, every court's running a little bit differently, but these are some things that we just need to understand. They're going to be fluid, they may be changing from day to day, and you should expect things to be different than what you've experienced before in regards to a criminal case if you've ever had to go through this process before. I'm hoping that based on this, you now have a good understanding of how the new extension of Georgia's judicial emergency affects your criminal case, the things that you need to be doing to make sure that your case doesn't slip through the cracks in a way that ends up hurting you, and that you're prepared for what's coming next. If you're facing a criminal case right now during this statewide judicial emergency and you'd like help with that criminal case, please contact our office to schedule a complimentary defense strategy meeting. Thank you.